Anastasia. Please tell us, what should the model of society be? Today, there are many forms of state and political structure, governance of society, political regimes, and ideologies. However, when you begin to examine closely each individual ideology or such a form, you understand that everything is built on the animal nature inhumanly. Even if, in theory, everything is beautifully drawn up, in practice, judging by historical events, it turned out, like in the saying, the proof is in the pudding. Rigdon. That is because everything that you have listed here is built on politics, that is, on control, power, and the undivided rule of politicians and priests over society. Haven't you noticed that even the words are written separately? State and society. Plus, the state is viewed as a political superstructure of the society and rule of authority over people. Take a look at the etymology of the word государство, state. In the Russian language, for example, государство, state, is a possession of государ, a sovereign. The old Russian word государ denoted both a particular person with power and a contract formula, for example, господин Великий Novgorod. This word is connected to господар, that is, what an owner, master, or the ruling prince was called. The Persians in the ancient East had an even more precise definition, the owner of sheep, gospodar. And do you know how the word politics originated? Anastasia. Well, as far as I know, from the Greek words politike, techni, meaning the art of ruling the state. And then some refer to the fact that these words, in their turn, are derived from the Greek words poly, meaning many, and techni, art, craft. Others believe that it originates from the Greek word polis, which ancient Greeks used for their city-states. Rigdon. This answer is quite predictable. This information is introduced to the human consciousness through many textbooks and books. But let us delve deeper into details. Where from did ancient Greece receive such a form of social governance? Moreover, with the self-designation of the highest official in ancient Greek city-states, archon. From ancient Rome, from the then-forming supporting nest of the priests of Freemasons, who were actually the ones who established religious cults and forms of social governance for their own purposes, created craft guilds, and so on. Where did the Greeks get such a form of government as a democracy? From the Greek word demos, meaning people, and kratos as power or rule, that is, the rule of the people. From the same place where the Romans got republic, from the Latin word res, meaning matter, and publicus, public, res publica, public matter. All these forms of government were devised by the archons, the priests of Freemasons, and promoted among peoples through public figures. You may wonder why under these so-called public forms of government and political regimes, which republic and democracy represent in the world today, peoples themselves are in fact removed from governing their own country. Although on paper everything is written beautifully, the law takes into account methods of collective decision-making, including equal opportunities, granting personal and political rights and freedoms to citizens, and so on. But in reality, we have a real seizure of the people's power by local and central priestly and political elites of the governing bodies and their arbitrary rule. These self-appointed elites almost openly divide public property among themselves, exploit people by neglecting their interests, and use the state resources for their own or their clan's selfish purposes simply for the sake of profit. While public is fed, as always, by promises from election to election, in reality, there is an ordinary behind-the-scenes struggle of financial and political groups, semi-feudal princelings and grey cardinals, fighting for an extension of spheres of influence that is their feeder. This is happening all over the world, and above all, in civilized countries. The same applies to the ideological models of political power, for example, liberalism, from the Latin word liberalis, meaning free, with its implementation of individual freedoms, as well as socialism, from the Latin word socialis, meaning social, which is based on the public ideas of social justice, freedom, equality, and so on. I'm not even mentioning aggressively oriented ideologies, political regimes, and forms of power based on one-man rule, tyranny, monarchy, or minority rule, oligarchy, aristocracy. So why does such a phenomenon occur in the modern world? Because everything was initially developed based on two stimulants of managing the masses, faith and fear, under the laws of materialism, or rather the animal mind, in favor of the lower instincts of a human, his earthly selfhood, where the spiritual goals proclaimed on paper served and still serve today only as cover for the actual absolute power of politicians and priests. That is why, even today, everybody is only talking about an ideal, humanitarian human society. But is anyone actually creating it in the real world? And even the very formulation of a question about the creation of an ideal society is invariably connected not to society as such, but to what will be the form of state power over that society, while preserving the same global system of governance over people by, again, priests and politicians. Anastasia: that's right. For people, any regime is a constant choice between two evils. Rigdon: quite right. So let us return to the word politics. The word polis is derived from the Italian polizza, which means a receipt, contract. The archons are very fond of launching their projects under words that have a double meaning. Considering themselves to be intermediaries between gods and people, the archons projected the priestly model of governance onto society, or rather onto that part of society which for one reason or another was not subordinated to their religious power. For instance, it would include people who lived in other countries, believed only in their local gods, had a different culture, and so on. The word politics was formed by them out of two Greek words, from poly, standing for many, and theos, meaning God, and meant nothing more than the rule of many gods over society. It is from there that 10 gods came about, politicians who are subordinated to the system of the archon's rule. It is not surprising that today many countries live with the Anglo-Saxon law as well as continental law, some of the most common among the world's legal systems. But back in the day, the basis for their creation was the Roman law, which was developed by the priesthood in ancient Rome, the law of the 12 tables and other priestly documents for governing people, written in the best traditions of the animal nature. Anastasia: well, yes, and that is why, as people say, the political law, just like the religious one, is always punitive. And in general, it is said, of course, that the world community lives according to the rules made by the archons under their aggressive signs. Rigdon: it lives so because people actually do not know who governs them and how, and they do not know because they do not delve deeply into these matters. If people show more interest in world's history, or at least heraldry, in medieval Latin, heraldus meaning a herald, the study of coats of arms, it will open their eyes to rather interesting facts to which they simply did not pay any attention previously. In particular, if we have a look at the standards, flags, emblems of princedoms, cities, and coats of arms of states, which as a rule were designed by the words of archons and palmed off onto ignorant rulers, then we can see the signs and symbols in them that influence the subconscious and activate the animal nature in people. All this exists today as well, and just like before, it is intended to secretly influence people's consciousness. It is enough to have a look at the official symbols of the modern countries of the world, their central and local government bodies, ministries, departments, and services, as well as at the symbols printed on the banknotes of various currencies of the world. These are mainly crosses, a mark to block the front essence, with a sign or a symbol, more often with the royal attributes of earthly power in form of a crown, and emphasis on the animal nature. Lateral essences of a person, which are mostly depicted in the form of one or another aggressive animal on each side of the central symbol. It is enough to look at the number of coats of arms and emblems marked with Freemason signs or symbols, starting with cities and countries and ending with international organizations and corporations. Bow and arrows, together and separately, axe, sickle, hammer, sword, rapiers, firearms, compass, lion, leopard, dragon, eagle, Phrygian cap and olive branch, Jewish priesthood. Not to mention the presence in many cases of certain numerical symbols in the form of stars, 6, 13, and so on. These aggressive signs are used in public attributes intended for mass production. That is, people often see and use them while taking them for granted in documents, on buildings, clothes, in mass media, and so on. Their effect on the human psyche is like a drop that wears away a stone. They subconsciously stimulate the animal nature and aggression, awakening the lower instincts. As a result, all this contributes to the growth of tension in society, like methane gas in a mine. At some point, it is enough to strike a spark, that is, to provoke aggression in a certain mass of people for an entire state to be swept up in a wave of violence and irreversible destructive consequences, or rather predictable, inevitable consequences. But this scheme of secret control of people works only as long as the majority of people do not know about it. Archons use every opportunity to place their signs and symbols on the territories under control, to put, so to say, their mold. What is more, all this is done quietly, with formal participation of peoples in such discussions. The decision, as a rule, is made by a narrow circle of officials, and yet another story is invented for the general public that precisely these symbols and signs are very significant for people living in the city or state from the point of view of history, philosophy, and culture of this area. Furthermore, sometimes these matters involve scientists who are given the task of substantiating precisely such an opinion and no other. But what I want to say about it is this: if people themselves, regardless of someone's opinion, become interested in history of their country and their people, and in symbols and signs, if they expand their horizons in these matters as well, responsibly approaching the process of cognition from the perspective of the observer of the spiritual nature, it will be more difficult to deceive them. After all, we're talking about the land where they, their children, and grandchildren are to live. In other words, when people know the truth, at the local level, they will put things in order themselves. For the main power is in the majority, in society itself, and not in a bunch of priests and politicians' minions. Anastasia. So the archons have made levers of control over the global society for themselves out of the world's politics, and from states as such, they've made tools of violence over nations and the means of enrichment for themselves and a handful of puppets in power whom they control. Rigdon. It is no secret that in any country of the world, the real politics is done behind the scenes, where its decisions and deals are not discussed with the voters. Anastasia. Yes, and society itself secretly promotes the model where the strong destroys the weak, starting with relationships in a small group of people, a family, firm, organization, and ending with relations between countries when strong states devour the weak ones and compete among themselves. In other words, the same laws of the animal mind. Rigdon. Absolutely. Evidence of such a system, which has been artificially created by people themselves, and which works as a conductor of the will of the animal mind, can be seen if one knows the whole truth of what politicians have been doing. Perhaps for a better understanding, I will give a typical example from history. Several centuries ago, in medieval Europe, there were many feudal principalities governed by rulers of all kinds. Each such princeling and politician had his soldiers, flags, coats of arms, retinue, and something resembling a government. His princely mercenary army was called a gang of bandits from the Celtic band, meaning a bond. So what did they do? Princes were constantly at war among themselves, and thus expanded the territory under their control, establishing taxation on the occupied lands for local merchants, craftsmen, and peasants. That is, they collected tax payments from them for their patronage and protection from other princes who in fact were also bandits. And you had better not refuse such princes' benefaction, since the one who protected and threatened was the same person. But the point is that there were many such hunters for other people's belongings, for there was major competition among the princes, so to speak, to provide military security services to the public. Today, one princeling politician organizes bloody showdowns, and tomorrow another one. And they all longed to be the defenders of the orphaned and oppressed. But in fact, it was a real robbery under the guise of protecting the population. As they say, a gang is still a gang. And today, nothing has changed in the world politics. Only now, open abuse of peoples is called peaceful taxation, but the system of extortion has remained the same. This violently peaceful, voluntary compulsory collection of money is a robbery of the population of the planet on small and large scale. It is just that today, all this came to be called by more beautiful words: monopoly on legitimate abuse, monopoly on customs duties, food, information, and so on. Anastasia. That is true. In many countries, a fee is taken from people even for a simple formal piece of paper, to process documents, confirm your own rights, and even to accept a complaint for consideration. This surely doesn't make the citizen's life any easier. Rigdon. Well, gangs will be gangs. They have remained as they were, only now they're robbing the population already on a different scale, using the laws written by them, although it is all about people themselves, who are the majority but do nothing, while the archons are a minority but constantly acting and very aggressively. That is all the difference. It is necessary for people themselves to wake up, broaden their horizons of knowledge, actively participate in the management of the world society, combine their efforts, be friends with each other, regardless of nationality, race, and country of residence. Then mankind will eventually come to that model of a just society of which it has dreamt for so long. Archons have made sure that many people would work for politics. In other words, that a significant human potential would be involved. Besides, the innovative human resource is mostly in their power, because the world science, in general, is sponsored and controlled by the organizations and funds dependent on them. Moreover, the archons initiated the creation of various sciences which study and develop methods of controlling the masses, so that people themselves invent how to put themselves into archons' shackles. For example, let us take sociology. from the Latin word societas, which stands for society, and logos, which means the study of. The science which studies society and the laws of its development, social groups, and relationships of the personality with society. What exactly do scientists study in the context of this science, executing the programmed tasks of those who sponsor and shelter them? Sociology does not study the inner world of human. Those in power have assigned this task to psychology and put the heat on to direct the priorities of its development at nurturing egoists in society under any plausible pretext. And spiritual matters were completely put under control of priests who are feeding off religions. Everything is divided and complicated in order to discourage a person from getting to the essence. What is the meaning of his life, who he really is, and what truly enormous potential he has? So sociology studies the behavior of large masses of people as well as various interactions in small social groups. In other words, these scientists observe the behavior of the individual and the collective animal mind. But who uses the results of their research and for what purposes? Again, politicians and priests do so in order to make it easier to govern people and to push the right buttons in their consciousness, activating the animal nature. And that is not to mention political science. It is ludicrous and sad to say what objective this science has and what it studies. For example, predicting a change of ruling regimes, the outcome of the political struggle of parties, inventing and producing political images for candidates, engaging in pre-election campaigns, and thinking up the speeches, not deeds, and new promises with which to win the public sympathy for a candidate during an election campaign. But political scientists, just like sociologists, psychologists, journalists, and other participants of this political show, are people of people. A politician only pays for some people to create a myth about him for other people so that he can get to greater power for the sake of his own interests. So it means that he is nothing on his own without the support of people who promote him with their own hands. Moreover, later people themselves carry out the orders of this politician and also suffer from them. In the world, elections of politicians have long been turned into a one-time massive political show called people's power. What is its hidden purpose? What is its influence on nations? What do masses see? Televised casting of candidates, some elements of reality show with juicy details of private lives of the main characters, their competition with each other in shocking statements, an endless stream of mutual accusations, and so on. That is, everything is done to stimulate the animal nature in people, make emotions and thoughts go around in a vicious circle, so that as a result, it would be easier to control this mass, regardless of who among these political puppets of those in power will win. Who today defines the vector of development of the global society? The archons do, and they manipulate the world politics as their own tool of power over nations. The archons are subordinated to the system of the animal mind, and they implement their ideas through politicians. But the majority of people do not know about these things happening behind the global scenes. They are deliberately fogged only by that theater of actions which takes place on the political scene of their country, thereby limiting the range of their cognition of more, narrowing their consciousness, and consequently depriving them of the desire to compare and analyze the events on the scale of the world society. So people see politicians developing laws by which the society is to live, but they do not even go into the question of why it is precisely these laws and why these particular politicians carry out these projects, why similar things are being implemented or have already been implemented in other countries of the world And how has it affected the life of society in reality? What dominant did it activate in it? At best, they let people understand that the politicians of their country defend the positions of a particular gang which they represent. But again, who makes all these programs a reality? Management of the current affairs of any state is carried out by the officials belonging, again, to the people. And who are politicians in any country? Politicians are people from the elite, who in their majority have mainly come into power in order to secure their business and satisfy their megalomania. Because such people who became dependent and fell under the power of the system of the animal mind are no longer satisfied with money. They already want to have something more. For example, the ability to control a large number of people and secretly enjoy these people's servility. Many of them do not even understand that they're only conductors of the will of the animal mind. Whether a person realizes this or not, his soul definitely suffers from this choice of the personality and an unwise waste of life forces which separates it from the spiritual world evermore. After all, life passes very quickly, and power is given for a short time, but the price for it is disproportionately high. A life's moment of human weakness turns into a long agony of a subpersonality and prolongation of the soul's ordeals in the captivity of matter. Too high a price will have to be paid for choosing those illusions which, like vapor, appear for a short time and then disappear in the darkness of existence. Those clever politicians who manage to see this global bluff and understand the current destructive direction of movement of the world society along the path of reverse swastika and realize wherefrom the root of all the evil of formation of negative world events grows, in their turn also do not know what is to be done. They're looking for an answer to the question how to actually get rid of this old sick tree of the system of power of the world priests, whose infected roots have entwined the whole world like an octopus. Actually, there is nothing difficult here if you understand the tools used by the archons, in whose hands most of the earth's capital is concentrated. The task of the archons is to impose another illusion, an ideology of the animal mind, to as many people as possible, so that the masses believe in it. For example, to convince the public of the advantages of the material way of thinking and the consumerist format of public relations, to frighten people with another world crisis, to convince of the necessity of starting a war or an ethnic strife, to set the followers of different religions at loggerheads, to arrange bloody strife, conflicts, color revolutions, and so on. And then, when masses of people are infected with these ideas, people themselves materialize them, starting to perpetrate all this disgrace with their own hands. The main thing for the archons is to activate the animal nature in people, or rather their collective animal mind. After all, they only write scenarios and sponsor their politicians, and it is their overall world political web that is the active tool to influence the masses. After all, who is a politician? An actor, one who plays the role written for him. His task is to make frequent appearances on the television screens of his country as well as in the press, speak beautifully, and inform people about certain ideas. Politics is the art of lying from Ahriman. It was initially formed this way by the archons and still continues to exist in this form in the global society. So a politician is, in fact, an actor. On the public stages of their countries, the politicians who work for the archons convey the ideas of their priests, script writers, and producers, sponsors, whose existence people do not even suspect. The public, while listening to the performances of such actors, thinks that everything said is a great idea of these politicians, which so convincingly calls for war or ethnic strife, supposedly in the name of a happy future of this nation, but none of them mentions that war brings death and any strife brings instability and economic recession in society. The crowd listens and hears the illusions, catching the ideas which activate the animal nature and which by and large come from the programs and purposes of the will of the animal mind. Imagine the archons proposing to each sensible person on the planet individually an idea that he should go to war with his brother so that archons could live well. Where would everybody tell them to go? That's right, to a certain well-known address. What intelligent person would want to destroy the peace and quiet of his family, relatives, and friends? What is war for most people? It is death, destruction, and grief. And what is the provoked war among nations for the archons? It is not so much a method of quick enrichment as a political game and the creation of conditions for greater control, expansion, and assertion of their power over the population of the countries at war. After all, during a war, the warring states not only deplete their resources. After it is over, the survivors still live in fear, and the countries are politically and economically dependent on the mighty of this world. The people on both sides continue to be afraid of each other and feel hatred even towards new generations born after the war. In other words, the masses live in constant fear of a threat of a new war. Thus, any war is a way of division, fragmentation of society, a method of intimidation of the people. It is not people who want war, but politicians and priests. It is not one country that attacks another, but a bunch of politicians and priests are playing their game at the expense of the lives of millions of ordinary people. But if friendship flourishes among nations, and people themselves actively contribute to it, the process of unification of the entire world community will begin. Together, people will be able to prevent any war, for all the conflicts in the modern world occur at the level of information to start with. That is firstly in people's heads, the world community, and only then are developed and implemented with their hands. For first comes information, choice, a change of consciousness, and only then the consequence of all this is action. People must not only understand this, but also to the best of their ability. They must actively oppose triggering of any war, especially at a stage of preparation of public opinion in the internet and the media. Otherwise, the archons will continue to use the effect of infecting the crowd through the army of their politicians and priests by playing out public performances, bullying billions of television viewers, and enslaving their minds in fear and obedience to the material system. If activism of the world society is awakened in the matters of self-government, and the very process of governance and all of its information is made transparent, and also this tool of archons is eliminated, politics and priesthood as world systems through which they influence the masses, then much in the life of society can qualitatively change. The archons are just a small, pitiful bunch compared to the entire humankind, and they live by deception alone that cannot last forever, like everything dead. For the one who has once betrayed himself and his spiritual nature, the truth seems foul. He lives by deceiving others, while in fact he deceives himself. The reason for the lie is not in words, but in the desire to deceive one's nature.